For marking out your box, it's always a good idea to start by checking that the edge is a 90-degree angle. And sometimes it's worth just using a tri-square and drawing a line right at the edge, just so that you're starting with the right angle. You then need to mark out your box, making sure that you put the ruler right against the first line. Remember to leave a 3mm gap for your tenon saw, and then measure from the second line. Once you've marked out your measurements, you then use a tri-square to draw the line at a right angle. So remember, when you use a tri-square, it's easier to hold it like this in one hand, then you've got your other hand free to use the pencil. Make sure as well that there's no gap here. If there's a gap slightly like this, it means it's not going to be drawn at a right angle. So get all of these lines drawn, making sure your pencil is nice and sharp as well. It's always good practice to put waist lines on where you're going to cut. For this part, you need to be sawing directly in the middle of the waist area and try and keep the tenon saw as straight as possible. So draw it back a few times. And start sawing. Another thing to bear in mind is positioning your thumb. So you might naturally want to put your thumb there to hold the work. However, obviously you could cut your thumb if you do that. You need to ensure your hand is as far back as possible. Alternatively, you could use a clamp to keep your work in place. Right, so now you should have 2 small pieces and 2 large pieces. Now, you can see that they probably do need sanding a little bit, and the 2 larger size need to be identical in size, and you can see that there is a slight millimetres difference. Now what you need to do is put masking tape around them, so we're going to sand them at the same time so that we can get them the right size. So you just need a bit of masking tape about that size, and position it on the edges where you're not going to sand. So you put it on like that. And then just need another bit on the edge like this. Okay, so I'm going to be sanding that side and that side. Repeat the process on the smaller parts as well. So we want to sand these so it's a right angle. So you need to sand it using the fence, and you'll have it at right angle like that. Now what you'll notice, this can move to whatever angle you like, so we need to set this so we know that it's a right angle. So get a tri-square, put the wooden bit against the disc and make sure there's no gap here, and tighten up the nut. And now we know that that's a right angle. Hold on to the fence when you sand so it doesn't slide about. Ensure that your workpiece is actually against the fence and there's no gaps at all. Just be aware, because of friction, your work can become very hot, so you need to make sure that you don't burn yourself when touching the work. Then get yourself 120 grit sandpaper. So you're not sanding much, you're just trying to get rid of the rough bits so you don't get a splinter. The next step is marking out the fingers. You need to come in 4mm because that's the thickness of the material. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then make a little mark. Then also do it on the other edge as well. Then get your tri-square and complete the line. So it should look something like that, and then repeat on all 4 pieces. Lay them out on the table and check that the wood grain is going horizontal on all of them. Next step, we need to get the 3 fingers marked out. So we need to measure this width, which is 60, so you divide that by 3, which is 20. So I'm measuring 20mm and making a little mark, and then another 20mm and making a little mark, and then I'm doing the same on the other side as well. I'm then using a tri-square to get all of these marks joined up and marked out accurately. So it should look something like this. So for your smaller bits, you're going to put waistlines on like that. And then for the larger piece, it needs to be opposite, so the waistlines are going to go on the outside. Go on the outside. So on the smaller piece, you're going to mark out on the inside, and then on the larger bit, you're going to mark on the outside. So if you put it in the vise, then you should be able to carry on the lines on the top as well, and also apply the waistlines. This is so we've got a line to follow when we're cutting with the coping saw. And if you repeat that on all of your pieces. To cut out this piece, you need to use a coping saw. So first of all, just cut down to the line. Make sure you don't go past the line. Now that I've made my two initial cuts, I now want to saw at an angle, starting from this point here, and I want to make my way down to the corner. Now that piece has come out, I can then turn the coping saw back and cut out that triangle piece. Now you need to make sure you go perfectly on the line. For cutting the outside parts, cut down the initial two cuts first. Then flip your work over in the vise and then cut the other bits. So you're always cutting down with the coping saw. You'll find this a lot easier to get straight lines. I found that if I held onto the work with one hand, it kept it more secure and I got a neater cut. If you do this, you need to ensure that your fingers are nowhere near the cutting edge. I have now cut out all of my finger joints, but they don't perfectly fit together. I will sand them to make them fit, but I will first number each edge so I know which side goes with which side. So it's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle. I'm using 120 grit sandpaper here, wrapped around a pine to use as my sanding block. I'm now sanding my work and making sure that I'm testing to see if it fits before I sand too much. This finger jointed box still needs a bit of work, it needs some sanding and it needs a base attached, but it's getting there.